So, on obviously we all know on March 1st of 2023, at about 9:56 a.m. in the morning, a fire was reported at the address of 743 slash 745 slash 747 Main Street in the city of Buffalo. Now, it has three numbers attached to the property, but according to the assessor's office and the actual ownership of the property, they use 743 as the actual number of the particular address. However, the only tenant in the building that was using the building, DC Theatrics, actually occupied 747. So for our practical purposes today, I'm just going to call it 743. That's actually the name of the LLC, 743 Main Street LLC. So I'll just refer to that as the actual number that we'll use. But just know that there's three numbers actually assigned to the building. It is a three-story building with a one-story attached warehouse to the building. The warehouse was totally empty and not in use at the time of the fire. The three-story building, at the time of the fire, the top two floors were not being used at all, the second and third floor. The only area of the building that was being used was the first floor and the basement of the building. The first floor was about a few months prior to the fire occupied by two different entities, one being DC Theatrics and the other being a bike shop. The owner of the bike shop had actually moved all his stuff out of there a few months prior to the fire. They shared the first floor of the actual building. The bike shop guy was gone by the time the fire took place, and so DC Theatrics was the only one using the building at the time of the fire, and they occupied about 2/3, give or take, of the first floor. They also occupied and used the basement area for various purposes, storing stuff, ironing stuff. DC Theatrics is a company that has been in existence for over 40 years. They provide basically costumes to everyone under the sun here in Buffalo. They have just a ton of costumes of all different makes and models and kinds that were throughout the actual first floor and the basement of the building. The building was recently purchased about 4 months prior to the fire in December of 2022. The owner is former Congressman Chris Jacobs. Like I said before, he named the company 743 Main LLC. The owner, once buying the building, notified the tenants that at some point they were going to have to move. Like I said, the bike shop guy got out of there pretty quickly, and DC Theatrics was in the process of trying to find a new place. DC Theatrics had a month-to-month lease on the property. The owner decided to hire a general contractor to do some work in the building to basically renovate the building. The general contractor actually hired a subcontractor to clean out the debris in the building, mainly on the second and third floor, and remove some walls and partitions in the building. So by the time that the fire took place on March 1st, pretty much the entire second and third floor was vacant, partitions removed, stuff out of there, and it was, like I said before, only the first floor was actually being used along with the basement. The general contractor and the subcontractor really have nothing to do with the fire. There was a third contractor that was hired directly by the owner. That contractor was JP Contracting. JP Contracting was hired to do some masonry work on the outside of the building, basically replacing some bricks that were damaged on the outside of the building, and JP Contracting was hired to do that work. They, about 2 weeks prior to the fire, they removed a metal door on the north side of the building because they were going to start their masonry work on the brick on the outside of the building around the north side of the building. They removed a metal door on the north side that went into the first floor, mainly into DC Theatrics, but it was also near where the bike shop guy had his stuff as well. And they put in a 1/2-inch piece of plywood covering the door. And they screwed the plywood in to the door that they had just removed, the door frame. Obviously, when the plywood went in, it did not completely fill up the door frame. It was not measured to the exact measurements of the door frame, and there were some gaps around the edges of the door, and also mainly underneath the bottom of the plywood. In addition to removing, when they removed the door, there was debris that was coming up right up against the inside of the door. They also removed that debris, threw some of it out, and actually pushed some of it back. So the materials that were in the interior where that doorway was were no longer now up against the plywood. They were moved back a ways. The exact distance I don't know, but the evidence that I've uncovered along with the ATF is that they were moved back a few feet or so. On the morning of March 1st, the owner of DC Theatrics was preparing for a big order, and he had left at about 4:30 in the morning that morning and gone home. He had been working all night long and into the early morning hours to get the order ready for whatever theater costume party he had to supply costumes for. And so he left the building at around 4:46 a.m. that morning. And when he left the building, he locked the door. There was another main door that was used to get inside the theatrics there, not the door to plywood, obviously. There was another door, the main door that was used as the main entrance and exit from the building. He locked that door, and there was no one in the building. 2 workers from JP Contracting arrived at about 7:25 a.m. About 3 hours later, they arrived. And their job was to do the masonry brickwork around the door frame there on the north side of the building. When they got to work, there was snow and ice that was not only on the ground leading up to the doorway, but there was also snow and ice on the building, actually in the brickwork on the building. And so at about 6:36 a.m., they got a propane tank, hooked up a blowtorch to the propane tank, and they lit the blowtorch. And they used the blowtorch to melt the ice on the ground where they were working and on the brick to melt the snow and ice. They used a blowtorch. They also used a leaf blower in conjunction with the blowtorch to apparently blow on the ice and snow to melt it quicker. And so the 2 of them did that. While one of them was using the blowtorch, they also had a metal shovel that they used to shovel the snow and stuff around on the ground there and ice. but they also used the metal shovel to block the flames. And they held the metal shovel up next to the blowtorch so that the flames wouldn't hit the plywood. They stopped using they used the blowtorch on and off from about 7:36 a.m. to about 8:17 a.m. So about 45 minutes on and off, they used the blowtorch to melt the ice and snow around the door and on the ground. And then, at about 8:20 or so, they started doing the actual masonry work because the snow and ice had been melted. And about an hour and a half later, at 9:53, they noticed some smoke. Well, one of them did. One went home on a break, and only one was left there at 9:53. The one who was left there, who did not go home on a break or take a break, he noticed some smoke. And he, 2 minutes later, at 9:55, he made the 911 call. And at 9:58, like 3 minutes later, the fire department got there. The first fire engine truck got there, and they now were engaged in putting out the fire. And as we all know, unfortunately, a Buffalo firefighter lost his life in battling the fire. The numerous agencies were involved, not only at the scene there, but in the investigation that followed. At the scene, the ATF showed up, the Buffalo Fire Department obviously showed up, the Buffalo Police Department showed up, the New York State Fire Marshal showed up, and everyone was there. Buffalo Fire Department obviously taking the lead in putting out and battling the fire. After the fire, these same organizations, along with my office, got involved in the investigation of the matter. Immediately thereafter, the ATF actually took the lead in the investigation, obviously with the assistance of my office, the Buffalo Fire Department, and others who were there at the scene. The ATF completed their investigation in mid-May. We got the final report a few weeks later in early June, and for the past month, we have been following up our investigation after receiving that final report. Our office also interviewed numerous witnesses and talked to people at the same time that the ATF was conducting their investigation. We basically, we were waiting for the final report to get done before we did anything or came to a conclusion, and i.e. me standing here today. And we kind of followed that up and did some wrap up in the past month or so. There are two areas that we need to look at here. The first area is the cause and origin of the fire itself. The second area is what happened inside the building after the fire took place, started. So there's two separate areas that need to be analyzed and need to be addressed. The first area, the ATF mainly did that. The ATF's main job was to come up with the cause and origin of the fire. That was their main goal. Now, in addition to that, they also touched on what happened inside the building after the fire started as well. But mainly, their main job was the cause and origin. There are two other entities that are actually still doing investigations right now, mainly on area number 2. The Buffalo Fire Department is doing their own line of duty /death investigation, which they do whenever anyone loses their life in fighting a fire. And there is a New York State entity called the Public Employees Safety and Health Bureau, called PESH, P-E-S-H. PESH is also doing an investigation as well, And again, they're mainly focusing on what happened inside the building when the fire started, all right? Now, I don't need really to wait for those investigations to get completed. I met with the actual fire commissioner yesterday, and he told me that both of those investigations are pretty much done. They're just putting pen to paper. And it really, the finality of those two investigations is not going to change my opinion. I guess I shouldn't say that definitively. Is there, I guess, a remote possibility that something could come out of those two investigations that I don't know about right now? Yeah, I guess there's a remote possibility of that, but I sincerely doubt it. And if there is, then I'll just come back up here and say, hey, it was remote and something came up. But that's not going to happen. The ATF, let's start with them. The ATF came to the conclusion, and they classified the fire as accidental. The ATF came to the conclusion and stated that the cause of the fire was the application of the open flame of the blowtorch that caused combustibles inside the doorway there to catch on fire on the other side of the door. Those combustibles, mainly bags of clothes that were inside the building there on the other side of the plywood. The origin of the fire was inside DC Theatrics, just inside of that northern doorway where the masonry guys were doing the brickwork on. So we know the origin, we know the cause, and we know that it's been ruled accidental. The ATF did a fantastic job, and in terms of the origin, they ruled out all other areas of the building. They ruled out the single-story warehouse attached to the building. They ruled out the third floor, ruled out the second floor, ruled out the basement, ruled out where the bike shop was, ruled out other areas of DC Theatrics on the first floor, and they were able to definitively, focus in on and ascertain the one area inside the doorway where the two guys were using the blowtorch. They were also able to definitively determine the cause. Again, ruling out all other aspects, ruling out electrical. The owner of DC Theatrics, the night before, when he was working there, he smoked cigarettes, and he would carry around an ashtray while he smoked cigarettes and put the cigarettes out in the ashtray. So they were able to rule out any cigarettes that the owner of DC Theatrics may have, used some 5-6 hours before the fire, the night before. The workers doing the blowtorch also smoked. And they smoked and discarded their cigarettes outside while they were working outside. The ATF was also able to rule out any discarded cigarette that may have got blown under with the leaf blower, blown under the doorway and inside the building for a number of reasons. First of all, it's really, really hard for a discarded cigarette to catch anything on fire. You literally got to have a lit cigarette and put it under Maki's skirt there, like right on it, all right, and it might not even catch on fire there, okay? It's really, really hard for a cigarette to catch a piece of clothing, even with direct contact, on fire. And the conditions at that time were not conducive to that even happening in the first place. The ATF uses a formula for humidity, and the conditions have to be right inside the structure, inside the room, from a humidity standpoint, for that cigarette butt to even be able to catch something on fire like clothing. That I think that humidity cutoff was like 25. And at the time, on March 1st in the morning, the humidity outside was like 65, 70. So, the ATF was able to rule that out as well. And come to the conclusion that, it was the flame from the blowtorch that somehow a spark or a flame must have got underneath the plywood there and caught the bags of clothes inside there on fire. The plywood door did not catch on fire. So that tells you something right there. The inside of the plywood door was charred, but the plywood door did not catch on fire. All right? So, from a legal analysis, so how do I get involved? From a legal analysis, I have, someone died, obviously. And there's potential, a building caught on fire. So there are a number of things that I'm going to look at, and I did look at. Let's start from the lowest rung and then work our way up to the top. The lowest rung is all of the potential, and I'll use the phrase permit issues, and I'll put that under a general umbrella, because there are a lot of issues under this umbrella. The bottom line is that none of them are criminal. None of them are penal law violations. They are all matters that potentially get handled in housing court here in Buffalo. They're all building code violations by the city of Buffalo that our office doesn't get involved in, and there are no actual criminal statutes to even prosecute those kind of cases. But we have referred all these issues to the city of Buffalo, to the appropriate entity, the inspector's office, whatever it's called. You can ask Mike DeGeorge what the right name for it is, but there's some inspector office over there. And all the issues have been referred to them. And they're numerous. JP Contracting didn't have a permit when they did this work. They didn't? Did not. They didn't think they needed a permit because they thought it was an emergency job because of the earthquake. And the earthquake moving the bricks on the building. And so apparently there's a rule that if it's an emergency job, you don't need a permit. Again, I'll let the Buffalo building department, handle that at all. That's not. I'll stay out of that's not my lane. But that's their defense for not getting a permit. So there was they didn't get a permit. They didn't have a fire watch. I mean, if they would have gotten a permit, like arguably they should have, then the permit office would have told them you need a fire watch. You need to have more than a shovel blocking the flames. You need to have a fire extinguisher. Allegedly there was a fire extinguisher in the van that the two guys brought to the site. I can't disprove that or prove that though, but evidence, that there is evidence that they brought a fire extinguisher and they had in the truck. What else were problems? There was no sprinkler system in the building at all. There was no fire alarms in the building. There was no fire, water extinguishers, in the building at all. But again, those are all issues. Those are all non-criminal issues. Okay, that again, the owner and the contractor have to deal with the city of Buffalo. But from my purposes, none of that stuff is potentially chargeable by me, and so I move on. And I go to the next ladder up, which is arson. And after a review of all the evidence, it is clear that arson is not applicable here because every single arson penal law has an element of intent. And there's obviously no intent to cause a fire here, or no proof of any intent to cause a fire. So arson, all the arson charges are now ruled out as well. Which leaves us with the death of firefighter Arnold. And there are potentially two charges that we looked at. The first is the reckless manslaughter, which is manslaughter in the second degree, and the other one is criminally negligent homicide. Now, in order for me to prove beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law the manslaughter in the second degree, I have to prove the following elements: that the defendant's conduct created a substantial and unjustifiable risk that death will occur. The risk must constitute a gross deviation from the standard of care that a reasonable person would use in the situation. And thirdly, that the defendant must be aware of the risk and consciously disregard it. Now here, we know that I can't meet that burden right there, the third one, because they were aware of the potential risk and they did not disregard it because they used a shovel to try to block the flames. In order to prove the criminally negligent homicide, the criminally negligent homicide has the same gross deviation standard and substantial and unjustifiable risk standard that the manslaughter charge has as well. But in addition to that, it says that a person fails to perceive any risk at all. And again, they didn't fail to perceive that because they used a shovel to block the flames, or to try to block the flames, all right? So, as you can see here, there's a common denominator in both of these charges, that I've got to be able to prove a substantial and unreasonable risk on top of a gross deviation of care here. On top of that, I have to factor in intervening events and intervening causes. And I also have to factor in foreseeability. Is it foreseeable that someone's death would occur when they knew no one was in the building, no one was in the building, and they took precautions to make sure the flames did not get in the building? The courts, especially our Court of Appeals, our highest court as well, okay, has also held on numerous cases that not every negligent act which results in death necessarily constitute criminally negligent homicide. That theory is emboldened and embodied in our case law. And the Court of Appeals has also stated in numerous cases across the state over the past 100 years that there has to be a direct correlation between the actions of the defendant and the death. So putting that in layman's terms, if you have, think of it as a chain, all right? If you have an action that occurs, and then you have numerous links of the chain, and then at the end of the chain, a death occurs, I have to prove that not only the links of that chain are a direct correlation to the death, but on top of that, I got to prove that nothing came in intervening and broke the chain of the links. And the bottom line is that I'm not able to do that. I'm clearly not able to do that. Um, like I said before, the firefighters got there at about 9:58. About 9 minutes later, an explosion occurred inside the building. Now, after that explosion occurred, there's a discrepancy as to whether or not a third explosion, well, let me stop it. After that, a second explosion also occurred in the building. There's a discrepancy as to whether or not a third explosion occurred. But let's just say, we know this. All the explosions, and they're definitely plural, okay? It's either 2 or 3. All the explosions occurred between 10:07 and 10:18 in that 11-minute period there. The first floor caved in down to the basement. And the cause of that cave-in caused a gas line to be severed in the basement. Now, it is unclear whether or not that severed gas line caused one of the explosions or not. No one's 100% sure of that. But there definitely was at least two, potentially 3 explosions in the building. And the explosions were clearly intervening events. And after the first explosion, the order was made to evacuate the building. And when the firefighters evacuated the building, they realized that firefighter Arnold had not come out. And a number of them, even though they were ordered to evacuate, a number of them went back in to find him. And after that, this second explosion occurred. And after that second explosion, the evacuation order was given again. Everyone get out of the building. And when the firefighters who went back in found firefighter Arnold, he was stuck. His foot got caught in a metal rack, a clothing rack, must have fell on top of him, and his foot and leg got tied in the metal rod on a clothing rack, and he was stuck. And they couldn't get him out. They couldn't unstuck him. And then the second evacuation order came after the second explosion, get out of the building. And they had to get out, or they would have died as well, maybe.
Was he alive when you found him?
I don't know that. So they then evacuated the building, and he couldn't get out. He was stuck. The cause of death was smoke inhalation and thermal injuries. Other firefighters had minor burns as well, but that was the cause of his death. And at 1:44 in the afternoon, his body was recovered. So, at the end of the day, from a legal standpoint, it's clear to me and my team here that I cannot prove beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law any crime of criminally negligent homicide or manslaughter in the second degree. I cannot prove any arson charges as well, and so The bottom line is that no criminal charges are going to be filed against anyone regarding this matter. As the ATF determined, this was an accident. This was a horrific accident, and I informed the wife of Petty Officer Arnold through her attorney yesterday. I didn't want her to hear it obviously on the news here, so I told her attorney yesterday that there'll be no criminal charges filed. She wasn't pleased, obviously. I don't blame her. But I understand that. I understand that people want to have someone pay for what happened here, and I get that mentality. But I ethically can't force a square peg into a round hole. Two wrongs don't make a right. And so I don't have the evidence beyond a reasonable doubt for any criminal charges at all. My heart continues to go out to the Arnold family and to the Buffalo firefighting community. But as far as I'm concerned, this matter is closed. Like I said, no charges are going to be filed.
What about civil liability? Do you see there being
someone when I made the comment that people expect someone to pay for what happened, there's two ways to get paid. There's criminally and there's civilly. Mm-hmm. So just because the civil aspect is done, the criminal aspect is done, there's clearly a civil component here, the wife, the family has Charlie Desmond as their lawyer. He's one of the best lawyers in town, and they will proceed accordingly.
And what about just the idea, from what you've heard, based on the findings and with the people you talked to, the fact that they were using the blowtorch to melt the ice, is that kind of against OSHA? Is that kind of like a gray area?
No, they say it's common. They say it's done all the time. Mm-hmm. It's stupid. If you think about it. I mean, you got a plywood door there, okay? Now, all right, they're using as my wife's got a perfect phrase for this, when she uses it against me all the time when I do work at home, okay? It's half-ass. If you're obviously you're concerned about the plywood catching on fire because you're blowtorching right next to it, all right? I get that. But all right, let's put up a full metal shield, all right, or something like that to block the flames and the sparks. Not a shovel like going on. It's stupid but not criminal.
So is it a matter of that if they had just taken the time to make sure that the plywood had fit the door properly and that there wasn't any sort of spacing, that this could have been avoided?
Maybe. Maybe. But again, you're never gonna. Every door has an opening at the bottom. Okay. So you're never gonna perfectly fit it. But again, that may have prevented the actual done a better job of preventing the flames and sparks to get underneath there. Okay, but that was only one factor. I can't say it would have prevented the death, obviously. I guess you could say that the fire didn't start in the first place, obviously, but there were, like I said, there were other intervening causes that actually led to the death of firefighter Arnold.
And you said that there was a leaf blower somewhere associated with it?
Yeah, they had a leaf blower outside, and they were using a leaf blower in conjunction with the blowtorch to melt the ice. The air, and the air didn't help, obviously. So if the air now from the blowtorch, from the leaf blower, is now getting through under the door, that's pumping air now into the building there, which gives a fuel fire.
So this door was an exterior door or an interior?
Exterior.
Exterior. It's right. Was it on the side?
Yes, side of the building. Yeah.
Okay.
The north side of the building.
Okay. And they were.
So we're outside now. That door goes inside the building.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they were standing on the ground.
Outside the building.
Outside
Yeah.
the building.
They never went inside the building at all.
Okay.
Never.
And they were using the blowtorch around the door.
Yep.
Or just
Yep.
everywhere.
Yep. So where it's like where that thermometer is there, like that's a brick right there. So they're blowing around that thermometer there because they're going to replace a brick where that thermometer's at.
They were removing bricks?
Yeah, they're removing brick. What's that?
Isn't that what it's called, like when removing?
Mark, I have no idea. I don't know how to fix a light bulb. That's me for. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a couple questions.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
This is Jason Arnold's widow who's texting me.
Yep.
She's sick over this.
Yeah,
She wants to know how you can justify no charges. She
Yep.
also wants to know what this says for other first responders putting their lives on the line every day.
Yep.
And she really wants to understand how you got to that conclusion.
Well, for the past half an hour, I just explained it. I mean, I got that conclusion. Yeah. I mean, so yeah, I get it. I get it.
And I think specifically the most important question is what does this say to other first responders putting their lives on the line?
Well, I mean, it really doesn't have any message at all in the sense that, I mean, what it says is that I, along with multiple other agencies, took this very seriously and did a thorough investigation of this matter. And so our seriousness in investigating the matter shows that we care about this, and we care about her, and we care about her family, and we care about the community. Like I said, you can't force a square peg into a round hole. And so, I don't blame her for being upset. If it was my wife or my husband, okay, I want someone to pay for it.
You said so yourself, it was sloppy.
Yeah.
The way that they went about this.
But not criminal.
Clearly, if they hadn't been sloppy, but if more work went into it from a legal standpoint, could you have set a precedent here?
No, because the precedent has already been set by numerous previous Court of Appeals cases on what the legal standard is and what you have to reach, okay? And so the evidence that I have doesn't come anywhere near those legal standards. It doesn't come anywhere near gross deviation, okay? You could argue it's deviation, but it's certainly not gross deviation what they did. It's clearly not a substantial and unjustifiable risk either, all right? And on top of that, what the main factors, not main, but one of the main factors here, again, are the intervening causes that caused the explosions in that building. And
It would have never happened if they hadn't been so sloppy.
correct, I agree. But you can't, you gotta have that direct link, okay, and all those chains going forward, and you just don't have it here.
On the day that it happened, I remember there was mention of propane tanks being in the area. Is that still?
There was a propane tank used for a blowtorch.
Oh, that was okay. Did
Yep,
that
outside.
possibly cause?
No, it was outside. It was outside. The propane tank was outside, and they used the propane tank to do the blowtorch. So yeah, it was outside.
Can you go over again the timeline of when the firefighters went in at 9:58, right?
Sure. Let's see again. So. I'll give you the entire timeline. So at 4:46, the owner of DC Theatric left the building. At 7:45, the two workers arrived. At 7:29, the propane torch was ignited. At 7:36 to 8:17, the torch was used in and around the north doorway at various times. At 8:35, the propane tank was turned off. At 9:53, one of the workers noticed a fire and attempts to extinguish it. I also forgot that point there. He took a bucket of water, he got some somewhere, and he threw it underneath the bottom of the door to try to get the fire out.
Was he able to open it?
He was able to, he unscrewed the plywood on the east side of the thing and pried part of the plywood off, okay? And then after that, he kicked it in and broke it in right away and then saw the flames inside there.
So he saw flames, not
Correct.
just smoke?
Correct.
Okay.
So at 9:53, Sabi appeared to notice a fire and attempts to extinguish it. At 9:55, he called 911 to report the fire. At 9:56, he kicked open the door of the plywood covering the north doorway. At 9:58, Engine 2 arrived on the scene. and at 10:07, the first explosion occurred. They call it a backdraft here. Immediately thereafter, they ordered evacuation of the building. At 10:18, a second backdraft is reported. And after that, all firefighters were ordered to evacuate the building. And at 1:44, his body was recovered by fire personnel.
And again, no permit for any of this work that they were doing.
Correct.
He was reported missing after the first explosion? Or
They,
realized that he was gone?
after the first explosion, they ordered to evacuate the building. They evacuated, realized he wasn't there, and a number of them went back in to go find him. And then a second explosion occurred, and then they ordered again, get out of the building. They found him when they went back in. They just couldn't unstuck him, and then they came out.
So,
Yeah, Dave.
clarify.
Yep.
So they go in, it's an explosion, they get out.
Yep.
He's not here, where is he? Go in and get him. And they find him then, right?
Mhm.
And then the second explosion.
Yes, sir.
And everybody out.
Yep.
But you were quite clear, you were asked, do you have any knowledge of whether he was alive when they
Yeah,
found him?
I don't know that.
You do not know.
No, I don't know. I don't know. I'm going to presume he was, because they were able to ascertain he was stuck. Now, I'm not sure how they could have saw that because the smoke was so dense. So I guess I'm presuming that he told them, "I'm stuck, guys," but I don't know that though. It was so smoky that they couldn't see anything though. Okay, so how, unless they felt around by his foot and ankle and felt the metal rod, there's no way to know that, Dave.
Can you elaborate a little on JP Contracting? Is this where company are they from?
I don't know that. All I know is they're called JP Contracting, and they sent two guys there to do the brickwork.
Do you have an owner's name?
No,
Who hired JP Contractors?
the owner, yeah, the owner did.
So it was not the general contractor?
Correct.
Or the first
Or the sub,
subcontractor?
correct.
This is a third, and they were doing masonry?
Yes,
And no permit because of an earthquake, and that's okay?
that's what they say.
That's what they said. So is there gonna be more of an investigation into that? It just seems like there are so many things that happened along the way that shouldn't have happened.
Yeah,
Including the firefighters going into the building when it was vacant. Is there anything that's gonna happen because of that?
You have to ask the fire commissioner about that. I'm not gonna get into that. The building department, city building department, has all the information now about all the permit issues, and they will look into that. So you have to ask them what they're gonna do next, if they can do anything. I don't know.
Is the full name JP Redding Contracting?
I don't know that.
You don't have an owner's name, right?
I do. It's in here, but I'm not gonna give the guy's name out though.
Who did you say was the attorney representing Jason Arno's wife?
Charles Desmond. Anything else? Okay.